Welcome to the 2016 President's Lecture Series. Please welcome San Diego State President Elliot Hirschman.
Good afternoon, and on behalf of San Diego State University's more than 340,000 students, faculty, staff, and alumni, it's my pleasure to welcome you to today's lecture. It's great to see so many devoted supporters of the university here today, which is a great reflection of the many collaborations between our university and our community. A special welcome to Linda's husband, Tom, and many colleagues in the community who join us, including Francis Allen, president of Jack in the Box, and Mike Freeman, division president at WD-40. Thank you for joining us. And I'd also like to welcome current and former members of our Campanile Foundation board who join us: Mary Curran, Lily Chang, Corin Winter, and Ralph Pescara. Thank you for all of your support. We're also very fortunate to have a number of university leaders join us, and I'd like to ask all of our vice presidents and deans to please stand so we can recognize you and thank you for everything you do every day. Thank you. Vice President Mary Ruth Carlton and our Campanile Foundation board are leading our first comprehensive fundraising campaign, and the generosity of our donors is transforming our university. Our goal is to raise $750 million, and I'm very pleased to tell you that as of today, we have surpassed the $686 million mark. Our university has been an integral part of San Diego for over 119 years now, and one of the most important purposes of this lecture series is to bring together our university and our community. Through collaborations, we're making discoveries and creating a better future, and our students, a number who join us here, are learning how to lead in a global society. Today, we're extremely pleased to welcome back one of our graduates, Dr. Linda Lang, MBA class of '91 and honorary doctorate 2013. Linda exemplifies the Aztec spirit, a spirit of innovation and entrepreneurship. She began her career at Jack in the Box as an accounts payable supervisor. Earning her MBA, she gained experience in finance, marketing, and operations. This broad background culminated in her appointment as president and chief operating officer in 2003, and she became CEO and chairman of the board in 2005. During her time, Linda was responsible for the restructuring of Jack in the Box's business model, moving from company-owned stores to a franchise model and expanding Qdoba Mexican Grill to over 650 locations. Through Linda's leadership, Jack in the Box's revenues exceeded $1.5 billion. Now, while Linda retired from Jack in the Box in 2014, she's continued her leadership role through volunteer service in our community and by serving as a corporate director. At SDSU, Linda has assumed a leadership role as a member of our Campanile Foundation board and the advisory board for our College of Business Administration. She and Tom support our veterans programs, the Lavin Center, and the College of Business Administration. In this context, I am exceptionally pleased to announce that Linda and Tom have established the Linda Lang Lecture Series in our College of Business Administration. This series will bring notable businesswomen to campus to share their stories and serve as role models for our students. Thank you, Linda and Tom. And now, please join me in welcoming Linda Lang.
Welcome to the 2016 President's Lecture Series, featuring distinguished lecturer Linda Lang.
Good afternoon. You hear me okay? Yes. Excellent. Well, welcome. Thank you very much, Dr. Hirschman, for that very kind introduction. I really appreciate it. And thank all of you for being here today. I didn't think there'd be volunteers for an additional lecture of all things, but I've got about, how long are lectures usually? How long do the professors lecture now? 2, 3, 4 hours. So no, I actually have a clock running down right in front of me. I have 28 minutes and 55, 54, 53. No, I have about 30 minutes or so, and then hopefully I'll leave time for Q&A, and I guarantee I will leave that time for Q&A. But welcome everyone, and welcome to those special guests that President Hirschman introduced, all the faculty, staff, students, my husband Tom, some friends from both WD-40 and Jack in the Box. Thank you very much for being here. So I'm going to run through a couple of things today. And a few months ago, they asked if I would be willing to do the lecture today about leadership and about my story. And so I said, that sounds great. I'd be happy to do that. And so I get Chris Lamarck, and thank you, by the way, wherever Chris is. She's sort of the one that arranged this whole thing and have worked with me on the presentation. So she calls me about, or sends me an email about 3 months ago and says, by the way, how are your slides coming along? And I break out in a cold sweat. I mean, I haven't had to do my own slides. I had the best executive assistant for 18 years when I worked at Jack in the Box, Dee, who couldn't be here today because she works for the new CEO. But she did everything for me, including all my slides. So I'm thinking, oh no, I'm in big trouble. So anyway, Chris was great enough, and all the production team that worked with her, to put together this slide presentation. And she said, would you like it animated? I said, I don't know what that means, but that sounds good to me. So you're going to see sort of an animated slide presentation. So it's got all these like moving parts, and if I get lost or you get dizzy, just raise your hand. But anyway, so let me talk. I'm going to talk briefly about Jack in the Box, a little bit about Jack in the Box, and then my career at Jack in the Box. And what I really want to do is spend time talking about kind of my lessons and my leadership values that were developed over the last 30 years of my career. So let's, so this one isn't animated. Why is it important to talk about leadership? Well, it's really important because every organization needs effective leaders, right? And it doesn't matter whether you're in a public company, a private company, your own entrepreneurial venture, a nonprofit organization, or if you're a student working in a team trying to get a project done. You need people who are effective leaders. And so I think that's going to be in demand more and more in organizations as they grow and as it becomes more competitive in the marketplace. But I actually started my career with Bechtel Engineering up in San Francisco. How many have heard of Bechtel Engineering? A very large engineering company. I was born and raised in Northern California. I got my undergraduate at UC Berkeley in finance. And so it was my dream to actually get a job outside of the US. And so I targeted a global company, and Bechtel was headquartered in San Francisco, and they had projects around the world. So I was one of the first females that they hired into their management training program in the accounting and finance organization. They recruited 22 graduates out of various colleges, UC Berkeley, all the Ivy League and so forth. So I was the first woman that they actually recruited into this management program. And then they would evaluate each of them, and they would ask you where you would want to work. And they had projects around the world. They had projects, they were building the palace for the Sultan of Brunei. They had projects in Riyadh and Jubail, up in Prudhoe Bay, Alaska, down in Chile at a gold mine. So I thought, wow, that is so exciting. I could travel the world. I could just work in one of these remote sites somewhere around the world. And I think at that point, I maybe had been on a plane 4 times in my life. So I think my parents thought I was crazy. So I applied, I got the job, and when they went to make the assignments, they would send this person to Brunei, this person to Riyadh, and so forth. And when they got to me, they realized they actually did not have any job sites that could accommodate women. They didn't feel that it would be safe or secure for any women to work in these remote job sites. So they assigned me to downtown San Francisco. And I went to work for Bechtel for the next 4.5 years, and it was a great career, early career. I learned a lot. I moved up in the management ranks in accounting and finance. And then in about 2000, what am I talking about? In the early 80s, mid 80s, my first husband and I moved down to San Diego. My parents had moved down here. My father was transferred, and I loved San Diego. Every time I visited San Diego, it was fabulous. So I moved down here and applied for jobs. And really, there was not very many big companies headquartered in San Diego, and I knew I wanted a corporate headquarters. So I applied for what was then called food maker. And I got a job there. I took a little bit of a cut in pay, a little bit of a reduction in position, but I was hired as an accounts payable supervisor. Now, Jack in the Box, as you know, and how many have been to a Jack in the Box? Okay, yeah, of course. How many have either lived on or currently live on 2 tacos for $99? Some students there, okay. How many have been to a Qdoba? Okay, excellent. Well, there is a Qdoba at the airport. So my husband and I, which I didn't even welcome my husband. Oh my goodness. Welcome to my husband. Thank you. My husband and I, when we travel, we always hit Qdoba. See, it says, welcome your husband right there. So anyway, but you can see that Jack in the Box is a publicly traded company. It's $2.3 billion market cap. It's traded on the NASDAQ with the ticker symbol JACK, easy to remember. And there's 2 restaurant concepts, Jack in the Box and Qdoba, and you can see the locations. But so I had, see, here's the animation. So as I said, I started in 1984 as an accounts payable supervisor, and then I took a hiatus from work. So in 1988, I got pregnant with my first son, Nathan, and was going to stay home for about 6 months, and I took my maternity leave, and at the end of 6 months, I'm like, I really can't go back. I'm just not ready. And they kept saying, no, we'll leave it open. We'll leave your job open. I said, no, that's not fair to you. So I ended up taking 3.5 years off. And when I got pregnant with my second son, I decided to go back and get my MBA. So I was a pregnant student finishing my MBA at San Diego State. He was born August 25th, and I finished that next semester. So, you know, at the time, it was challenging, but it was also really fun, and so I had a great education. I decided to go back to Jack in the Box. I applied to get back into the organization, and I was hired as a financial analyst, working in various departments, and I moved around quite a bit. And then in January 1993, there was a major foodborne illness outbreak. For students, you probably don't remember, but a lot of the other people in the room, I'm sure, remember. We lost 75% of our sales overnight as a result of that outbreak. It was a very, very tragic time for those that were impacted by the outbreak, and a very difficult time for the organization. But it actually provided me with an opportunity that I wouldn't have had if that had not happened. And that was, I was a franchise analyst, financial analyst, working with our franchisees, and they had filed a lawsuit against the company. And so I was asked if I could come up with a solution and an offer for a settlement. So I spent many, many hours working with the team of executives on coming up with a solution and an offer for the litigation. As a result of that, because of my visibility and my exposure to the senior executives, they asked at the end of that assignment, when we kind of settled everything and the business was moving on a little bit, if I would be open to moving into marketing. And I was very comfortable behind a computer doing spreadsheets. That was before Excel. That was like Lotus 123 or something, if anybody even remembers that. But they asked me if I was willing to move to marketing, and my first response was, no, I'm really happy in finance, and that really wasn't the right answer. He was president at the time, encouraged me to seek out the marketing position. And they were looking for a creative problem solver who could take a more structured and formal approach to marketing. So it took me several months to feel comfortable in marketing. And one of the things I'm going to share with you is it happened to me many times in my career where I was offered an opportunity, or I was seeking out an opportunity, but I wasn't quite sure that I was going to be ready for it. So if you think that you're going to be ready, for the next position, that you have to be absolutely ready, you probably won't be. There's never such a time where you feel 100% confident in a position that you're taking that's new. And that includes everything from taking that first marketing position to taking the CEO position. It's kind of like deciding when it's right to have kids, right? If you never really get ready, you're never really prepared to have children, so you'd never have a family if you felt like you had to get everything in your life together before you had kids. And we would miss out on so much. So I moved into the VP of marketing and ran marketing for several years for Jack in the Box. That was a great time for us. It's when we did the whole Jack's Back campaign. I then moved into the field as VP of operations, so that was another big change for me. Now, operations in the restaurant organization is really where the money is made. That's the front line where you're serving the customer every day, and it's a very, very tough business, and it's 24/7. So I agreed to take on the job of overseeing 200 restaurants in all of Southern California and out to Palm Springs and so forth. And I did that as a kind of a stretch assignment for about a year and a half and really enjoyed that and learned about the business. But I remember the first weekend of that job, we had just opened a new restaurant out on the way out the 8, if you're going towards Yuma. There's several Jack in the Boxes out there. We had opened it up, and 2 days later, it caught on fire and burned down. And I got a call very late at night saying one of the restaurants had burned down, and I'm thinking, that's horrible. Is everybody's safe? Everyone was safe. I'm thinking, now, what am I supposed to do? So I went back to sleep and dealt with it the next day. But those were the kinds of calls that I would get. And there's got to be someone that I should be calling. And everybody was doing their job. They knew what they needed to do in terms of insurance and cleanup and all of that. And they had it completely handled. But those are the things that you get called on when you're head of operations. But it was an excellent experience for me. And so in 2003, I was promoted to the president. Now, I felt confident that I could move into the president role. The person that I was working for, who was the president, a guy named Ken Williams, was a great mentor of mine. He was retiring, and he recommended that I take his role as president. The board of directors at the time didn't know me very well. I had been in some of the board meetings, but I didn't know all of them. And I was a young female. It was all men, and they said, I don't think she's really ready. They told the CEO that. I'm not sure that she's quite ready. So I told them, why don't you give me a chance to talk to the board directly and tell them why I believe that I'm ready. So it's kind of another lesson, right? Make people understand, have a conversation with people if there's something that you want, that you think you deserve, and you think that you can do a good job. And an hour with the board, and I convinced them that I was the right person for the job. Not only the right person, but it was time to go ahead and make me the president. And so I was promoted to president in 2003, and then it was a fairly easy transition after that when my boss, the CEO, Bob Nugent, retired, and I became chairman of the board and president. And I thought it would be pretty easy to transition from president to CEO, but it was very different. It was a different role. It was a more outward-facing role. So it was not only taking care of your customers and your employees and your franchisees, but you're also taking care of your community and your suppliers. And then you have your shareholders, and then you have your set of bosses who are the board of directors. So it was a very different challenge for me. And again, had you asked me, was I completely ready and completely confident? The answer would be no. But I knew I could do a good job, and I grew into the role and very much enjoyed it. And people used to say, wow, it's so unusual for a woman to be a CEO of a major company. People were not used to seeing women as chairmen and CEOs of multi-billion-dollar public companies. And so I began to kind of study some of the statistics, and I want to share just some of those with you in terms of gender diversity at the top of organizations. But you can see, and then Chris was nice enough to add retire, but then watch this. Then I said, well, then I fall off the map. Then I disappear and go away. She said, no, you're just going on to bigger, more fun adventures. So that's true. That's a good way to look at it. So every year, UC Davis publishes a study of the top 400 public companies headquartered in the state of California. And they've been doing it since 2005. And so I've been kind of following the statistics of that, and I think you'll find it interesting. So of the 400 top public companies in the state of California, 4.3% of them are led by women CEOs. On a national level, the Fortune 500 and the Fortune 1000, it's about the same. A little tiny bit higher, but no more than 5%. Believe it or not, that number is actually higher than it was in the previous year. So that number was 3.5%. So that's the good news. It's gone up a little bit, but that only represents 17 positions out of 400. Then when you look at something, the board of director seats, so boards of directors, as well as what's designated as the highest paid executive position. Every public company has to report to their shareholders and to the SEC the highest, it's usually around the highest 5 top executive compensation. So that was another thing I didn't like about being in a public company was your compensation was published in the Union Tribune actually every year. But she said, sorry, it's fine. It's all public information. So those combined positions, women represent 12.3% of them. And if you pull out just board of director seats in the state of California, and among those 400 companies, there are 3,260 board seats available. Women have 432 of those, and men have 2,828. The last statistics I'm going to show you on this UC Davis study, actually in September of 2013, the California State Legislature, seeing this trend and wanting more women represented on public company boards and in top-level positions at the state of California companies, they had a resolution, a Senate resolution. It's not a binding resolution, but it's more of a recommendation to companies in the state of California that if you have a board, if you're a public company, if you have 5 members or less, you should have 1 woman board member on that board. If you have a board that is more than 5, actually it's 5 to 8 members, you have 1 woman, and if you have 9 or more, there should be 2 women on the board. And if you meet that, you comply with this Senate Resolution 62. So last year, 2015, 17.5% of the companies in the state of California, those 400 companies, actually met the Senate resolution. It's a little bit higher than it was the previous year, but still not where it should be. And the prior year was 15.8%. And I'm actually very happy to tell you that both WD-40 and Jack in the Box meet the Senate resolution in terms of women representatives on the board. So that's a very good thing. So the good news is that it's moving in the right direction, still not where we want to be. And but I think we're going to make progress, and especially when I see some of the students and the diversity of the students, whether it's gender diversity or ethnic diversity, I really think that these statistics and the way it looks today is going to change dramatically in the next decade or so. So I realized that I was in a pretty unique position being on a public company board, such a large board, and being a female leader. In fact, there were several times when Tom and I went to trade shows or conferences, and they would automatically start talking to Tom. And he would very graciously say, actually, you really should be talking to my wife. She's the CEO. And it happened a lot. And it wasn't anything, they weren't being rude. It wasn't anything. It's just they were not used to seeing a woman in that role again. And so it was something that was unusual. But what I want to share with you today is really about my values and what I think helped make the difference in terms of my career. There's lots of things that impacted my career. My father was very encouraging to me early on in my life. He died when I was relatively young. He was only 59 years old, but he was very supportive of me in terms of getting an education, getting a good job. I started out as an early childhood education major at Chico and changed to a finance major at Berkeley. I would have been very happy being a kindergarten teacher, but I made the transition, and it worked well for me, and he encouraged that. I also had the support, as I mentioned, of the former chairman and CEO, Bob Nugent, and the former president, Ken Williams. They were great mentors and very supportive of me. But I also think it was my strong work ethic, my perseverance, and my values. And I articulated what my values were at my retirement. We had a franchise conference with all the independent franchisees of Jack in the Box, and they have a lot riding on the company. And I know Frances is here, and she knows the pressure that comes from those independent operators of Jack in the Box restaurants. But I articulated to them what my values were, in hopes that it would be a legacy that I would leave to the company. So first, talking about leadership, and here's a quote that you can read, but if your actions inspire others to dream more, learn more, or become more, you are a leader. And I think Elliot Hirschman is an absolute perfect example of what a leader is. He came to this campus 5 years ago, he's created a vision, and he's inspired and motivated others to achieve that vision. And so thank you for doing that. You've been very inspirational. So first one is to build trust and loyalty through integrity and honesty. Absolutely critical, right? And what is integrity? It's the quality of being honest and having strong moral principles. It's a personal choice to be a person of integrity and high moral standards. Look at our presidential campaign, what's happening, right? But when you're a leader and people look to you and you are relying on people to be your loyal team members who are all inspired to move in the same direction, you have to have integrity and honesty. Encourage collaboration, not competition. Now, I'll be the first to admit that I'm competitive on the golf course, okay? I am, although I didn't think I was, but then people told me that I am, so I guess I am. And I think my husband says that I am. But not in the workplace. I really believed in a culture of collaboration because I think you get more done as a team than you do as individual. And so for me, it was always about the success of the team and the business and not of the individual. And that worked well for me, and a lot of those team members I still am friends with. They're still running the organization, and it was a fantastic team that I built. Learn from your mistakes. Don't be afraid to fail. Okay, here's a quote from Winston Churchill. Look, it's coming up. Yes. Success is not final. Failure is not fatal. It is the courage to continue that counts. And I'll tell you a story, an early failure that I had, but it's deeply embedded in me. I was running for class secretary in 9th grade. And I don't know, not a lot of you are old enough to remember, but there was a campaign, there was a commercial. It was for one of the airlines, and the flight attendants would come on. They were stewardesses, I guess, at the time, and they'd say, "Hi, I'm so-and-so, fly me." So my speech started out as, "Hi, I'm Linda, fly me." And people were like, "What? What? Why would she say that?" And it went downhill after that. It wasn't a great speech. It wasn't a great campaign. And that was the pinnacle of my political career, actually. I lost. The principal called in all of the losers at lunch, at the beginning of lunch. He brought us all in together, and I'm looking around, I'm thinking, okay, these are all losers. I know, because I knew who was going to win, the other positions, and I'm thinking, I must be a loser. I'm here. So I don't even know what he said. I was just, you don't hear anything because your ears are ringing and you're starting to pass out. And he said, you didn't win the class secretary. And I was stoic. And then I ran home and I left and I said, I'm never going back to school again ever in my entire life. And my mom was home, she wasn't working, and I literally just left. I just walked out of the school. And she said, "Honey, you are going to survive. You're going to be okay. It's just a minor blip. It's not a big deal." And I said, "I can't go to school tomorrow. I'm so humiliated. I lost the class secretary." I mean, class secretary. It's not like I was running for president or anything. I couldn't even get class secretary. She's like, you're new to the school. Nobody knows you. You didn't really campaign that hard, and you didn't give away anything. And so, and she was right. I didn't really put that much effort into it. So I decided that I would go back to school the next day, and you know what? I survived. And I never have run for any other political office. But it didn't keep me from continuing to put myself out there and continuing to try things that I really didn't feel comfortable doing. So that is that. Learn from your mistakes. Don't be afraid to fail. And I'm going to borrow, actually, because there's a couple of people from WD-40 here. That the CEO of WD-40, his name is Gary Ridge. He has a great, he says there are no mistakes. There are only learning moments. And it's so true, right? You learn from everything, every mistake that you ever make. Every failure you learn from. And in fact, I used to have on my desk a little saying that said, imagine what you would attempt to do if you could never fail. What would you try? And now it's not on my desk because I don't have a desk. It's on my bathroom counter, and when I blow dry my hair, I look at it every day. So the next one, though, is be tough-minded but tender-hearted. And that, again, was something that Gary Ridge used to describe me. It was an interview for something, and he said, Linda's tough-minded but tender-hearted. And I'm going to share another quote. It's, to handle yourself, use your head. To handle others, use your heart. It's so true, right? Make those intellectual decisions, going through your analysis, do all of the analytical, the pros, the cons, however you make your decisions. But if it involves people, if it impacts people, be compassionate and caring, and use your heart. And I had to make a lot of those tough decisions. It was a very difficult time during the recession. It was a difficult transition when we went from corporate-owned to franchise-owned, because all of that overhead that you have to support corporate operations kind of gets shifted over to the franchisee, but you're left with a lot of positions that have to be eliminated, and that's people. And so having to eliminate positions is very difficult for a CEO. But if you do it with care and with compassion, you get through it. And you know that after, the business is going to be stronger. You're going to provide more opportunities for people. But it's so true, and that's always been the way I make decisions. And then lastly, or not lastly, second to last, because I'm looking at the clock. I have a minute and 29, 28, 27. Be humble and appreciative. People don't like people who are braggadocious. I love that word. Is that really a word? Someone used that, and I like it. And so, what is humility? It's defined as having a modest or low view of one's own importance. It's the state of not thinking you are better than others. If you position yourself as caring for others around you who are making sure that they're successful above your own success, you're going to go far. And the last one is commit to diversity and inclusion. Oh, I went too far, but you can see, let's go back. Commit to diversity and inclusion. I made it very clear to my management team and the folks at Jack in the Box that I wanted a diverse workforce. And it doesn't happen by chance. It isn't random. You have to seek out those qualified, diverse candidates when you have positions open, whether it's a board position or a vice president position. So I continue to believe that it's going to take extra effort to find those diverse candidates, but it needs to be a commitment from the top. And so that was always my commitment. So I hope that my lessons and my leadership values have inspired some of you as you go forward in your career, especially for your students, that you'll need to kind of define yourself and understand what drives you. What are your values? What defines you? And those were the ones that defined me over my career. So I very much appreciate your time this afternoon. And now I do have time for Q&A. I didn't have my strategy that I had when I used to have conference calls. So conference calls were probably the most stressful thing that I had. Once a quarter, you'd have all these analysts call in. Well, you'd have a script. So you had a scripted press release or earnings release of all the critical numbers for the quarter. And then you'd open it up to Q&A. And it was all in this big conference room. And you'd have all these people sitting there with all the notes and all stuff on chalkboards, and because you never knew what they were going to ask. So I thought, well, what if I just talk really long with a scripted thing, and then we won't have very much time for Q&A? Is that a good strategy? And they're like, no, you need to open it up to Q&A. I'm like, well, what if every answer I'd say is really long-winded, and then there won't be enough, we'll run out of time for Q&A. It didn't really work. But so I didn't do that today. We had plenty of time for Q&A, so thank you very much.
All right, Q&A. So if you have questions, there are microphones out here, so if you please start lining up. I'm Mary with Carlton. I'm the Vice President for University Relations, and we won't ask you about stock prices or things like that, or your golf score or anything like that.
Golf score, that's
you would tell us the golf score?
Well, no.
No, you wouldn't. Tom would know, though, I know.
Tom would know.
Tom would know. It's competitive. Yeah. Anyway, those are great life lessons, and thank you for sharing those today. And I can see we do have a lot of questions. So let's start with the first question from this gentleman right here.
Hi, I guess it is on. Hi, I'm Mike Calise. I run an electric vehicle charging equipment company called Car Charging Blank. One of the questions that I have for you is the challenges you had to go through with balancing fast food, which is not notoriously healthy, right, with profits and what's important for your shareholders. So tell me how you dealt with those challenges throughout.
Yeah. It really is about the brand, right? And so you need to understand who your target audience is and what's important to them. And they wanted delicious food that was offered at a competitive price. But we wanted choices. They wanted choices as well. So you need to offer a wide variety of food, including some healthy choices. I can tell you the healthy choices that are on the menu, and there are healthy choices on the menu, were not the top sellers. But you have to have those to just avoid the veto vote, where someone says, I really need a salad, or I want a chicken teriyaki bowl, or I want a chicken fajita pita. So there are a few healthy options, and we address that. But that's not really what is selling to that target audience. If they're looking for healthy food, they're probably not going through the Jack in the Box drive-through.
What's your favorite?
I like these new buttery burgers, but Tom and I love the two tacos.
I knew you were going to say the two tacos.
I know.
I knew you were going to say
They're really, really good. I don't know what it is about them, and there is meat in them, by the way. And there is actually soy. There's soy and there's meat, and they're delicious, and it's a corn tortilla, and it's cooked in trans fat oil.
You're making us all hungry.
I know.
You're making us all hungry.
Anyway.
Okay. Let's take the next question.
Hi, I'm Lindy Hotchkiss. I work with Willis Towers Watson. When you retired, I think I saw something, you were one of 28 women running Fortune 500 companies, and now you've left Debbie Reed as one of 23, I think was the latest stat I saw. What's going on?
We need to get more women in those organizations. I took a break from work to have my children, and I was able to transition back in, and I think some women, it's harder to transition back in if you take a break. It's very difficult. But I think there are some organizations that are looking at programs to help women get back on track after a break in their career. And it's going to take other people who have that commitment to diversity and inclusion to reach out and provide that visibility to those women in the organization.
Kind of on the side of that topic, you referred a little bit earlier to the campaign for president, and there's been a lot of talk, especially from Secretary Clinton, about equity and pay. What's your feeling on that?
If you look at the data, if you kind of really look at the data, at similar levels and similar experience and background, the pay is very, very close. It really is. It's when you look at differences in experience, years on the job, and so forth, where you see the disparity. And so I really don't think it's a major issue. I never felt it was an issue with me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. We have another question.
My name's Lev Kirshner. I'm with the men's soccer program here at San Diego State. Twofold question. When you got back into the transition, was your aspiration to move up into that role, CEO, or did it just kind of happen osmotically? As you went through that process, how did you balance your family?
Good questions, very good questions. So the first question is, did I sort of set my sights on the CEO role? Not early on in my career. No, I really didn't. I was happy doing what I did. I was very challenged. I moved around a lot, so I was always looking for other opportunities, but I enjoyed the challenge. It wasn't until I went out into operations in 2000 where the then CEO said, you know, if you want a shot at running this company someday, you need to go out in the field and understand what this business is all about. And that's when I first realized that, well, maybe I do have a shot. And it was 5 years later that I took the CEO role. And then in terms of balancing, I have a very supportive husband that helped a lot. It's not easy. You can't. I wasn't a Boy Scout leader or the den mother or anything. We had the school had this casserole cook-off thing. You had to donate a casserole, and then the women would all come, and they'd have this big chalkboard, and then you'd write the name of your casserole, and people would bid on them. And I was in a panic. I'm like, I don't even know how to make a casserole, and let alone. So I told Tom, I'm like, what am I going to do? So I came up with a casserole. I put it on the chalkboard. No one even knew who I was at the school. And everybody else knew the women that cooked really good, right? Those were the casseroles that went first. Mine was left at the bottom. I'm like, I bid on it myself, and I bought my casserole back. but that's my point. You really can't do everything. You have to pick and choose. I never missed my son's football games on Friday night. I always made football season and Friday night football games, but I didn't get to go on field trips. But my younger son, he said, do you think you could bring lunch for me and my buddies sometime? I said, I think I can do that. So I took off one day. I went through the Jack in the Box drive-thru, and I pulled up with a bunch of tacos and burgers and fries, and he was the most popular kid at lunch that day. So that's what you have to do.
That's a great one. Next question.
Yes, I'm Sue Hunter, and I'm chairman of an investment company. And there's such a strong anti-business sentiment in the country today, particularly among young people. What do we as business leaders need to do to convince particularly young men and women that business is not the enemy?
Yeah, I do see that. I do hear that. I think it's just reinforcing the message that, look, it's really about giving people a way to make a living, giving people jobs, providing a place for that job security, providing benefits for the family, and providing opportunities for people. And it can be in a company, it can be in their own entrepreneurial venture, it can be in a nonprofit. It doesn't have to just be a business, but it's really about providing a livelihood for those, for families and for individuals, and showing that there are opportunities. But it is a little out of favor, and especially in the kind of banking investment world.
Next question.
Hi, my name is Jack Sword. I'm an Aztec for Life. I have a couple of marketing questions, but before I do that, you need to know the tacos are now $1.19.
Oh, that's right. Oh, my goodness. You didn't tell me. How come I'm still paying 2 for $99? Okay.
So
well, that's still a pretty good deal, though, isn't it?
Yeah.
Had them the other day. It was great.
Okay.
So the first question, it goes back to all the different suppliers, you folks, and McDonald's, everybody else, was supplying action figures for the kids. Has that been effective? It seems it's being offered less today. Was that something that was just a fad at the time?
You know, Jack in the Box never actually targeted children. We were targeted towards young adults, and so we never had a big program with kids' meals. We let the national players that would co-promote with animated movies and stuff do that. And so I'm not sure if they're, my guess is they're still doing that, but that was really never a strategy of Jack in the Box. Okay. And we had some of the bendable Jacks and stuff, but it was really about the Jack personality.
Well, I do have the entire collection, but
that could be worth something someday. I'd save it.
The toughest one is the skateboard, by the way, just for reference.
Okay.
So you talked about the Jack in the Box figure. Has that been effective in growing your business or attracting new customers? The Jack with the figure
yes,
with the Jack
that was a very, very effective campaign. So we launched that in 1994. It was 1 year after the E. coli outbreak, where we had really suffered a lot. The brand had been very damaged, and so we needed something that was pretty bold, very bold. And I was in marketing at the time, and I remember we needed a new advertising campaign, and so we brought in several agencies, and we narrowed it down to 2 agencies. One was the Jack campaign, and one was a guy from, it was an agency out of San Francisco, and it was one of the kind of sing-along ones. It was a guy singing, I remember a big guy, red hair, red beard, and he would sing these little catchy tunes that were commercials, and we were divided as a group. One was very edgy and irreverent and very different with the Jack character, and the other one was safer. And I remember the creative director saying, you know, if it doesn't make you feel a little nervous, then it's too safe. And so we voted, and in the end, the Jack campaign worked, and it worked extremely well for us for several years.
Thank you.
All right. Next question. Go right ahead.
Hello, my name is Baron Wellman. I'm a graduate of 1980, and I'm a retired CEO like yourself.
Excellent.
Former Vistage chair, and today I coach business owners and CEOs, in particular on leadership development. You talked about one of the keys to success was building trust and integrity, and that actually is one of the biggest challenges I have when I go to work with a leader. I often find they don't trust the people they've hired or the people that work underneath them. And they don't know that the employees know that they don't trust them. It's interesting. But the employees know that. And so
Absolutely.
one of the things I have to do is I have to teach them to speak in the language of a leader and to teach them how to show their employees that they actually trust them. And first of all, teach them they can be trusted. So besides telling them, I trust you, when you hire somebody to a new position, what would you do or say as a leader to make sure somebody knows you trust them?
I think actions speak way louder than words in that regard. So if you really trust someone, you get out of their way. You let them do their job, you provide the resources and the support, you eliminate barriers, but you let them do their job. And you don't second guess them. And so that's what I did with my people, and it worked extremely well. And if someone wasn't doing the job that they needed to do, then I moved them out. But every single person that stayed with me, I trusted 100%, and they knew it.
Excellent, thank you very much.
Yeah.
If you had to go back and start over again, after you left Chico State, Berkeley, whatever, would you do anything differently looking back on I mean, you've had a fabulous career. You've recognized as a leader, a woman leader, and somebody we're really proud of at San Diego State, but would you do something different?
I probably would have taken up golf earlier. I wouldn't have done anything different with my career. I loved being at home, for those 3 years, getting my MBA.
Right.
I don't think so.
Yeah.
No. Yeah.
And now you're retired, and how was
Yes.
that?
I love it. I mean, I've jumped in with 2 feet.
I always think about people you
Yeah.
were so busy. I remember when we would we'd try to go visit Linda, and it would take 3 months to get an appointment, and you were just really, really busy. So now you're not that busy.
I am really busy.
But you are busy.
I don't know
You're
what
playing a lot
I
of
do.
golf. You're playing a lot
I
of
don't
golf.
know. No, I don't know what I do. We were talking about that at lunch, and I said, I think the pace of life is just different. I used to just run to the grocery store, or Tom would run to the grocery store, and I would just throw things in the cart. And now I'm like, I had no idea there were so many coffees on the shelf. I mean, it's amazing. I can just savor everything.
That's
it's
great.
wonderful.
That is really great.
Yeah.
All right, we have a question from Dr. Welter.
Yeah, hi, my name is Steve. I work on campus. And one of the things that a comment and then a question. My comment was, as we leave our parking lot and you have to make a U-turn, and there's a Jack in the Box on College, and apparently it has the mystical power to force my car to turn in. and my discovery that I hadn't expected was I didn't realize that I could buy and enjoy the tacos when it wasn't 2 a.m. and you're sober. So
They taste just as good when you're sober. You're right.
I've heard. My real question, though, is I used to be asked by my doctoral students when they were thinking of getting pregnant or were pregnant, how to handle the hiatus that they were expecting. And I would give an answer, but I always felt a little uncomfortable. I didn't really know what I was talking about. So what advice would you give maybe the people in this audience and maybe to prospective students as well?
Yeah. I mean, I would, taking a hiatus, I would still stay connected. I would still network. I would still reach out. I would still, if you want to go back into that same field, I would read up. I would make sure I knew what the latest industry news was, whether it's business or science or anything. I would not walk away completely. I would still stay engaged.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Next question.
Hi, I'm Whitney Whitehill. I'm a current student. I want to know how you personally define leadership.
The ability to inspire and motivate others around a common goal would be the simplest way. So it doesn't matter what that goal is. It could be anything. It could be your own, it could be a family unit, right? You could have leaders in your family.
Hi, I'm Bob Battenfield. I was the director of advertising with Jack in the Box in the 1970s. I wrote the first marketing plan. They didn't have a marketing plan before that.
I believe it.
Well, my degree is in journalism, and I never had a marketing class. So when I began to write the marketing plan, I went and got a book out of the library, looked up goals and objectives. But what I wanted to comment on was the climate, the atmosphere of management in the 70s. This was the Beatles era, of course. So we all had haircuts like Beatles and wore multicolored clothes and high-stack shoes. So anyway, the neat thing was, though, that we had people who had known each other from junior high, high school, Hoover and Helix, a lot of people from San Diego State. So out of the core people at Foodmaker, I would guess that 30 to 40 of us were people who'd known each other for that period of time. So yeah, I'm sure there must have been a difficult transition to becoming more professional or more, more educated in their own fields. I was there 7 years and started my own ad agency after that. So I didn't keep track really of all the people, but my point is that there was a transition certainly. And I wondered, in your experience in looking back at the company as you came, were you aware of that sort of thing? I mean, the old guard, the old boys club that ran it in the 70s and then how it went into the 80s.
Yeah, by the time I got there in '84, a lot of those folks had already moved on, were out of the company. They had retired, but the board of directors at that time were a lot of them were friends and had been friends for a long time. And the board, when I became chairman and CEO, I think I changed out almost all of the board members. Maybe 2 of them were already there, but it makes it difficult if you don't have a truly independent board. And so I think it did transition quite a bit from that time. But it's also fun to work with your friends.
Yeah.
But friends can also, they don't have to be friends that you grew up with. They're just people who you really respect and then you enjoy being with, and you're working with them every day.
Okay. We have a question?
Hello, Linda. My name is Leo Carrillo. I'm the Associated Students Executive Vice President. And I first want to say I'm a huge advocate for Jack in the Box. I got through my freshman year of college eating Jack in the Box, which was in 2012.
Okay.
So you were still CEO. And I want to say that I really do, and I'm sure everyone here is really inspired by your speech. And here, CEO of a major corporation, and I want to say I'm going to be the future CEO of Nike.
Excellent.
But my question to you is, what are you doing daily to ensure your growth and development as a leader continues?
Yep, it's a good question. I boss my husband around a lot. No, actually, I think that was probably my biggest fear is what am I going to do? Am I going to be on his case all the time or something? I mean, I don't have anybody to boss around, but we have a dog. No, I am still a member of the board of directors for WD-40 Company, and that has always been great, and it's a challenge for me. And then I just joined another board. It's an investment fund. It's a Goldman Sachs investment fund, and I just started that in January. And so that is a whole new area for me that's really challenging me, and it's really fun. It gets me out to New York 4 times a year, and so I'll continue to do that kind of work. And then also being much more involved with San Diego State. Mary Ruth and I have been talking for years about that.
Yeah, it took a while.
It did take a while. I kept saying I kept telling everybody, please, I need a year off. I need literally a year to decompress and travel and do some fun stuff. And the year was up, and then I'm like, I need 2 years off. And so in 2016, January 2016, yeah.
But she told us a year in advance.
I
So
did.
We were okay. We have to wait 1 year, and she'll be on a board.
And they were so good. You didn't bug me at all. I was like, great.
But we had your name written down in the notes.
I know.
We kept telling the board. So they were ready.
Yeah.
Some of the board members who were here, I think, would have reminded you of.
Right, no, but it's great, and that's what you have to do.
Yeah.
You do stay engaged, and you find those things that are important to you, and you have passion behind.
And Leo, when you're leading Nike, we will be coming to ask you for a very large gift.
Yes, yes,
Keep that in mind,
and
right?
shoes.
And shoes, lots of shoes, lots of shoes. You have a question?
Hi, Stephanie.
Hi, Stephanie Venti with the Preuss School. Very inspirational. I just was really enjoyed hearing your talk.
Thank
you. I was struck by your ability and confidence to take risks, even though when you said you didn't feel like you were really ready. I feel like a lot of people, but particularly women, sometimes suffer from imposter syndrome, where they feel like they're not enough. What would be your advice to really anyone who may be suffering with that, or really to help encourage you to continue to take risks?
Yeah, that's a good question. Does everyone know kind of what that imposter syndrome is? Is like you feel like you don't really deserve to be in the role you're in, and it's real. And I can actually remember President Hirschman calling me when he said that they had selected me to receive an honorary doctorate. And in my mind, and I think I even said, really? Why? Why me? I mean, that wasn't a very good reaction, I realize, and I'm sorry about that. But I thought, wow, that's such an incredible honor. I don't really deserve that. But then I started thinking, and I looked at these statistics, and I thought about my career, and I said, well, no, I deserve it. Why not me? It's going to be somebody else. Why not me? And I think you just have to constantly tell yourself that you're working hard. You worked hard to get what you deserve, and embrace it. But it's not always easy.
No.
Yeah.
Certainly well deserved, though.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you for coming out today. My name is Deon Acres. I'm an employee here up in URED. You are in a position where you're serving in a leadership role at WD-40 and some others, where I think that's kind of new to you and in the later part of your career. And at Jack in the Box, you were there for 30 years, essentially. And I'm wondering if you could just talk about if you see your position different because you had so much vested time in one place and you moved up the ranks, to whereas, in WD-40 or Goldman Sachs, you kind of came into a leadership position. If you see that your relationship there different, or how it's affected things.
It is a different transition, right? Because when I joined the WD-40 board, I had all these credentials, and people didn't really know me. They knew me by my title and my experience and my background and my education, but they didn't have any face-to-face time, and they didn't see me grow up in the organization like Jack in the Box did. So it was a different transition. Jack in the Box, I had to, every role that I took on, every promotion, suddenly I was in charge of the people that I was peers with. And then when you get to the very top, there are people that you were peers with 5 levels down. And you have to respect them, and you have to acknowledge them, and you have to say, you helped me to get to where I got. You cannot get to the top on your own, and so there wasn't a single person in that organization that I didn't feel that didn't help me get to the top. But it is different, and I realized when I took on the CEO role that suddenly my voice was so much louder, and people laughed at my jokes even though they weren't funny. And, I would make a little suggestion, and all of a sudden everybody was like, I said, hey, what if we had yogurt for free in the cafeteria? These guys are laughing because all of a sudden the entire supply chain was finding a yogurt machine and sourcing yogurt for the cafeteria. And you still have the yogurt machine? Yeah, awesome. So, but I was just kind of talking out loud, and I realized I can't do that anymore because then people, they jump to it. And so I would say, look, I'm just talking out loud here. I don't want you to do anything with this. It's just an idea. But it was very different. Good question.
Hi, Linda. I'm Bill Snavely. I'm
Hi, Bill.
a communication professor, and I teach leadership. And I thought maybe you could have a few words of wisdom. By the way, I loved your lecture.
Thank you. I'm like, what grade?
We'll have you to class later. What are the words of advice you would give to students in terms of the skills that they can develop while they're here at San Diego State?
Excellent. That's a very good question. You have the ability to work with teams, right, on projects. That's one of the greatest skills that you can have as a potential leader, is the ability to collaborate with others on a common mission. Because then you know what good leadership looks like. There's always going to be someone who steps up into that role and says, this is what we have to do. This is our assignment. Here's our deadline. Here are our goals. Let's break it down. Let's delegate and so forth. And I think that's a great exercise for students to be involved in in all of their classes. I'm sure they have that opportunity.
Okay. You have a question?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for coming out to speak today.
Thank you.
It definitely inspires women to continue to lead. I recently read a book called Lean In by Sheryl Sandberg, and you mentioned you had a hiatus in your career. Was there a defining moment for you where you decided to lean back into your career?
I think it was, I just really missed that intellectual stimulation and challenge. I loved being with my kids, but I remember going to the park and desperately looking for other women that I could talk to about business or something. I couldn't find anybody. And so I'm like, what can I do? Oh, I'll get my MBA. Perfect. It was sort of, I really need to get back into the game. I felt like I really needed that, and I was able to balance it. So for me, that was important. But it's not everybody decides to do that, and that's okay. And that's, I think, a lot of what the Lean In book talks about, is that all women can choose which path they want to take. Don't think that you can't take the path back into the business world or a corporate position just because you have a family. Don't think that having a family is a dead end for you. So good question.
Okay, so great answers. Thank you for this conversation and sharing all
You're
this with us.
welcome.
Yes,
Perfect timing.
Perfect timing.
Thank you. Good questions.
So I think one of the things I learned today is I knew you were funny, but I didn't know you were this funny.
Really?
Yeah, you really have a great sense of humor. It's really fabulous.
Thank
Which
you.
is why one of the things I probably really helped you as you were going along in your career, that you could laugh at things.
That's true. Well, I mean, gosh, I sold hamburger and French fries for a
Yes,
living
you
for
did.
30 years.
Yes, you
so
did.
you
And the
kind
guy
of
with the big head was
you kind of have to have a sense of humor.
Yeah, you do. You do. Yeah. And it's a good thing you have a sense of humor, because now we're switching to a little more different kind of questioning.
It's not a truth or dare or something like that.
Well, it's close to that. It's close to that. We call this rapid fire questions.
Okay.
And some of you have probably seen this before on ESPN and other places, where we ask kind of off-the-wall questions in a rather rapid little pace. So you have to think quickly.
Can you hear my heart beating right now?
Right now. But we know that you'll be great for this. She's a really good sport. So our questioner is someone who is, I think, a real dynamo. She is one of our new leaders in university relations and development. She's a former student leader here at San Diego State. She was executive vice president of Associated Students. She's now getting her MBA here. And her name is Chanel McNutt. So please welcome Chanel McNutt to do rapid fire questions.
Thank you.
Oh, you were great. You were great.
Hi,
how are you?
How are you? Nice to me, right?
I'm going to be nice.
Okay.
But I was told to bring the fire. That's what they said.
Really?
Yeah, bring the fire.
Bring it on. Okay, bring it on. Bring it on. I'm ready.
All right.
Oh, we're out of time.
Oh, no.
Down to 0.
Darn it. Didn't even get one question. It's all right. We're going to go. First one. Who is Jack of Jack in the Box?
Oh, that's a secret. I would have to kill you if I told you the answer to that.
I've always wondered that as a kid. Who is the
he's
guy?
Real. He's
Who
real.
is it? I grew up with Jack.
I'm sorry.
It's okay. It's all right.
I signed a non-disclosure.
I'll have to try for it later. It's okay. All right. Okay, Linda, first question. What profession other than yours would you like to attempt?
Oh, that's easy. I always told people I wanted to be Madonna. If I wasn't chairman and CEO, I would want to be Madonna, but she's sort of old school, so now it's Taylor Swift.
Okay, nice. Okay.
She makes a lot more money.
I'll be Beyonce. You can be Taylor.
Awesome.
Let's go.
I love it.
Road trip.
Okay.
What is the best piece of advice you ever received?
Probably from my boss, Bob Nugent, who I was sort of whining about not getting a promotion. And he said, you know what, Linda, just just focus on doing the best job you can in your current position, and it'll come. And that was really a good piece of advice, and it was true.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Tell us about a book you recently enjoyed.
I just, finished a little while ago, The Boys in the Boat. Have you read that? It's really good. It's about the crew team from the University of Washington that went on and won the gold medal in Berlin in the 1936 Olympics. And it was really had a lot of heart, a lot of spirit, and it was really about these young men who came from very poor backgrounds who achieved just an amazing feat in winning the gold medal.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it was a good book, very good book.
Are you an
I don't
avid
even
reader?
know. For years I just read trade magazines and stuff, boring. And for me, I'm so intense that if I read a book, I just don't want to put it down, and so I don't start a book because everything else falls apart. Nothing happens.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
It's getting hotter in here because the fire is building.
Oh.
During this rapid fire.
Okay.
If you could invite any 3 people to dinner, who would they be?
Oh gosh, I'd want to have fun. I'd want to have Lucille Ball. I Love Lucy was my favorite show. Carol Burnett and Ellen DeGeneres.
Ooh, that's a fun dinner.
I think it'd be really fun. Yeah.
That'd be awesome. Can I video conference?
Absolutely. Yeah, you come as Beyonce and you can.
Let's go. All right. What would you choose as your last meal?
Oh, that's easy. It wouldn't be 2 tacos for 9. I'm sorry, but it would be San Francisco sourdough bread, Alaskan king crab legs, and a hot fudge sundae.
Wow, that was pretty specific. I like sourdough
I've been asked
bread.
that question before. Actually, it's a funny thing. We had a group. Do you remember that? It was a group of women, and it was an icebreaker thing. And one of the questions was, "What would you have as your last meal?" And 2 of us, myself and Mary Lyons, just retired president of USD, had exactly the same last meal.
No way.
Yes, it was freaky.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'll have to put that on my list. Must be a good meal.
Maybe she's been stalking me all this time. I don't know. Yeah, the same meal.
Okay, let's go. What is your favorite film?
You guys, oh God, you're gonna laugh. The Big Lebowski. I love that movie.
I don't know what that movie is.
Oh my God! Are you kidding me? Okay, do you have like Netflix or anything?
Yes, I have Netflix.
Okay, Big Lebowski is all-time classic. You guys like Big Lebowski?
Okay, I gotta watch it.
Okay.
Big Lebowski, I got
You might not get it, but
Okay.
I mean, it's a little quirky. I love quirky, silly slapstick films.
Okay, Lebowski.
Yeah, The Big Lebowski.
Okay, tell us about.
I've seen it like how many times? A lot. Yeah.
Tell us about an interesting or surprising thing about yourself.
I'm actually an introvert. I really am.
Wow.
Yeah, I know. There's 5 of us in my family. I have a brother who's 14 months older than I am. And he was always the charismatic one and always front and center, and I was the shadow behind. And so my aunt Penny, who used to drink a lot at our family functions, and she would film all of them. And she just put together this film of us when we were kids. And so she gave me the CD. So I watched it, and I'm like, oh my God, look at me. I'm just like this little shallow willow of a thing out in the background. And my brother is like the life of the party and everything. It's still the same. But no, I am an introvert. I need to kind of rejuvenate. I need a lot of downtime and a lot of alone time.
That's why you needed those 2 years after your theater. A lot of introversion.
Yeah. You could be right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, tell us about a person who has influenced you the most.
Gosh, probably my husband.
Aww.
Yeah, he I know. No, Tom and I met almost 20 years ago. So I was my career was really taking off, and he just was such a huge support for me, and he was always there for me, and always encouraging, and very thoughtful and kind and generous, and he never says a bad word about anybody. He's just the greatest guy.
No, he's so nice. At lunch, great guy.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great guy.
In fact, he was so good that people at Jack in the Box, when I didn't bring Tom, they were like, "Where's Tom?" No, really. And I go, "Well, I'm here." Well, they're like, "No, where's Tom?" They loved having him at all the events.
No. All right. What do you consider as your greatest accomplishment?
Oh gosh, I think having my kids. I have 2 boys. They're both working, so they couldn't be here, but it's just wonderful being a mom. I'm very close to them. They're 25 and 28, and it's a challenge being a mom. You have your ups and downs and everything, but to raise 2 children who are happy and healthy and kind that's probably my greatest achievement.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, you survived rapid fire.
Oh, yay.
You were waiting for it, huh?
That's not so bad.
Wasn't too bad,
Thank
right?
you.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. I
appreciate
think
it.
as being a current MBA student, former student, it is just so inspiring to hear the things that you've done and being a member of our MBA program. So
Thank
just
you very
awesome.
much. I appreciate it, Chanel. Thank you very much for being here this afternoon. And I guess there are cookies out there, right?
But before you get your cookie, we're going to bring up President
okay.
Hirschman.
Okay, there's more.
There is more.
Wow.
Thank you so much for that inspiring presentation and for being so open with us. And it is my honor and pleasure to present you with the Presidential Medallion.
Oh my
We're gonna turn this
goodness.
microphone over.
Wow. That's so nice. That's beautiful. I really appreciate that. Wow. Can I run for president now?
Yeah, certainly. And you can wear it proudly everywhere.
Beautiful. That is really beautiful. Thank you. This has been a very special afternoon for me. I appreciate it, and wonderful questions.
Wonderful. And thank you all for joining us. There are cookies outside.
Thank you. I'll grab this.
Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes our 2016 President's Lecture Series. Thank you.